Alright, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. T here yet again. Don't mind the gloves. I found them because they are my old marching band gloves. I was in marching band for 4 years. 2-time state champion in marching band, 1-time state champion in winter percussion, drum major my senior year, perfect season my freshman year, and I could go on. I won't. I could, but I won't. I could, but I won't. And I found them the other day, and they're actually really comfy. So I felt putting like putting them on. I wanted to find my cousin so I could like take one off and smack him with it. If you met my cousin, you'd understand he deserves it. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are here with our Third Amendment. Let's recap really fast. We have our First Amendment, which covers our right to religion, speech, petition, assembly, and press. I know I didn't say those in order. I put petition third instead of last. But the other 4 were kind of in order. Now, the next thing we have is our Second Amendment, which protects our right to own a gun within reason. You can't own bazookas and machine guns, but you can own semi-automatic rifles like my gun here. Yes, you saw her name in the last video. I decided to use her since she gets, jealous of Becky. That would explain a lot about my personal life. But we are finally on to our Third Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, and that is no quartering of troops. Now, this amendment, I know I said this about the last one, I still went over, but, the petition. But this amendment is probably one of the most, it is the most unused amendment in history. It's only ever been used, well, in our history. It's only ever been used once in American history, and it never made it to the Supreme Court, and it had to do with National Guard soldiers, not the actual Army. And I know the National Guard is still of major, major importance, but when we think no quartering troops, the first thing we think of is like soldiers who actually go overseas. And yes, our National Guard does go overseas, but you get what I'm saying, okay? Now, we're going to clear up some things about that, okay, in this video, but first I want to give you some history. I know I didn't give history on the Second Amendment, but that's because I ran out of time. I can almost guarantee I won't run out of time in this video. But so way back when we were still colonists, okay, when the United States was still controlled by Great Britain, and we finally kicked their butts in a war and won our independence. I'm really digging Great Britain in some of these videos. But once we won our independence from Great Britain, we decided to put this in. James Madison, one of the Federalists, and I'll get into that in another video, he put it in to ease the tensions of some of the non-Federalists or anti-Federalists, such as Thomas Jefferson. So James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, butted heads big time. Now, the thing is, the reason this amendment was put into place, but yet we've never used it, is because, one, it's kind of self-explanatory. I mean, if you really think about it, the amendment says that Congress isn't allowed to put troops in private homes, period. Well, in time of peace, and then they have to pass laws during time of war to do it. So it's this is probably one of the most self-explanatory amendments there are. So, back to the history of it really fast. So, starting in 1765, okay, there was this war called the French and Indian War. The rest of the world knows it as the 7-Year War. It was basically Britain and France versus each other in America, and there was some fighting going on back in Europe. Some people even consider it the first ever World War. But as far as we're concerned, Americans are concerned, it was Britain and France fighting in our territory, or what would become our territory, fighting over the Ohio River Valley, which is kind of like in the near the state of Ohio and Illinois, in that area. And the French were helped by the Native Americans, or the Indians, however you want to say it, and it was us, the colonists, fighting alongside the British. After the war, Britain felt that we as the colonists needed to pay and help keep soldiers here to protect against further attacks. And what they did is they passed the Quartering Act of 1765. Quartering basically means living, okay, or in oversimplified terms, living. So Quartering Act means living act, okay, in, like I said, oversimplified terms. So basically what that means is, in 1765, when they passed the first Quartering Act, it allowed soldiers, when the local barracks, or the place soldiers are supposed to sleep, whenever that became too crowded, they were allowed to then stay in like inns and public areas and taverns and things like that, okay, which is kind of like the 1700 versions and 1800 versions of like hotels and stuff, okay? They were allowed to stay there free of charge, okay? They didn't have to pay for it. Then, after the Boston Tea Party, where colonists dressed up as Native Americans, threw a whole bunch of tea into the harbor. I'll put down here the exact number, because we know the exact number of crates, which Great Britain is still to this day billing us for. After they did that, the British passed a bunch of laws called the Intolerable Acts. There was 4 main ones, but there were several others that were directed mainly against the colony of Massachusetts, but did affect the several colonies in general. And probably one of the most hard hit of those was the Quartering Act of 1774. Okay, so 2. There was 1765, which allowed public areas like taverns and inns, or, that time period's versions of hotels and stuff. And then there was the one of the Quartering Act of 1774. Okay, that is what really dug it in hard with the colonists, and because that allowed soldiers to be quartered in private homes. So if you were a private citizen, a good, law-abiding, upstanding citizen, just doing your own thing, at any given time a soldier could come to your home, knock on the front door, he could knock down the front door if he really wanted, walk in and live there, and you had to support him. You couldn't do anything about it. You couldn't say no, you didn't have a choice. The soldier lived there, okay? He was now a resident in your home. And during our revolution and after the revolution ended, the founding fathers were like, no, we aren't going to have that happen. We don't want soldiers living in private, or forcefully living in private homes in a time of peace. Okay, Congress, like I said, can make laws in time of war. Now that we kind of done the history of it, back to the law. Like I said, there hasn't been any Supreme Court cases on this amendment. Okay, none. Not a single one. However, there was one in the Second Circuit Court. Now, there's 13 circuit courts in our nation, and they're the ones that are kind of right below the Supreme Court. So if you don't get your way in the Circuit Court, your next step is the Supreme Court. And again, oversimplification version. Now, the Second Circuit Court covers New York, Connecticut, and Vermont. Okay, so north or back east states. Now, the court case that, my mind just went blank. Oh yeah, the court case that covered this, okay, it was the Second Circuit Court. It was not a Supreme Court, which means that this technically does not affect the U.S. as a whole. It only affects New York, Vermont, and Connecticut, okay? Now, I'm sure if another district were to bring up this same issue, the Supreme Court would be in favor of what I'm about to tell you. But the court case was Engblom v. Carey, 1982, okay? I'm probably saying that wrong, and I'm sorry, but it's Engblom v. Carey, 1982, and you'll see it pop up here so you know the exact spelling. And the Second Circuit Court basically said 3 things, okay? Or give you history. So basically there was this big strike of police officers in New York, and they were on strike. The National Guard was called in to basically do the police's job during the strike, and some of the police were housed in public tenants, okay? So that, like, the city owned it, or, they didn't own it, they were just living there. And the National Guard soldiers came in, kicked them out, and they started living there. So the officers on strike took it to the Second Circuit Court, and the Circuit Court determined 3 things. First off, when it comes to the Third Amendment, National Guard soldiers National Guard troops are considered soldiers. They have the exact same consideration under the Third Amendment, and I'm sure they would probably take that further into, just law in general. The second thing is, the Third Amendment applies to the states. Okay, like I said, we fight over, whether they apply to states or not. This court case did say it applies to the states. Okay, and the third thing, and this is the biggest thing of them all, it says that the Third Amendment doesn't just protect homeowners. It protects anyone who is lawfully or legally living in a place that they would consider their home. So that means apartments, that means people who live in, publicly owned tenant houses like the police officers did. If you legally live there, or you legally reside there as a tenant, okay, and you have a right to, or you have a perceived right to privacy, it's considered your home and soldiers can't come in. Okay? So like I said, that's really it for this amendment. Okay? Oh, and one last thing I forgot to mention in the history section. The quartering of troops was mentioned in the grievance section in the Declaration of Independence. So where we list everything that was wrong with Great Britain in the colonies, quartering of troops was mentioned in there. Other than that, there's really nothing on the quartering or the Third Amendment, okay? Unlike the Second and the Fourth, the 2 that kind of sandwich it, there's so much on those. There's not a whole lot on the Third Amendment. So that's all I have for you today, ladies and gentlemen. Stick around next week for the Fourth Amendment, which really gets heavy, and it has to do with warrants and if police officers can just kick down your front door. So, as always, stay beautiful. I'm actually going to stay under my time today. So, stay beautiful, Americans. I love you all, and have a nice day. Mwah. Peace.